In the story so far, after rescuing Alina's father, you shipped him off to the High Hall with some trustworthy imps, and ventured into the endless maze to confront Baphomet's Glabrezu. During the battle, which Marka found particularly stunning, Jean Lemore was nearly rent in two. Everyone kept changing places, and a Minotaur walked on the ceiling. But eventually Ethel's water elemental chased the Glabrezu into Alina's deadly blades, and you sealed the gateway behind you, returning to watch Maud flee the scene astride a flaming horse. Thankfully, she'd given you the password to Jander Sunstar's torture chamber, though as she'd warned, he couldn't locate Zariel's sword and only suggested you ask Lulu, who was apparently there at the time, but can't remember a thing. Still, Gargoth recommended Mad Maggie, who was just this way at Fort Knucklebone. Besides selling infernal war machines, slow-moving versions of Mad Max vehicles, the Night Hag also collected dreams and nightmares, and could probably restore Lulu's memories. So, with Ethel's magic, the party glided 500 feet from the floating city to the Avernian plain, Jean Lemore at least trying to hold Kenway's hand on the way down so that he wouldn't have a panic attack.
Oh.
Then, despite the GM not having a clue about how to run a hex crawl, you stumbled upon Fort Knucklebone, where Mad Hats gave Ethel the finger, Jean Lemore healed a flesh golem, Marka helped experienced mechanics do their job, and Kenway was the only one who could stomach the food. Mad Maggie agreed to use her psychic distillerator to extract Lulu's memories, but the hag's invention malfunctioned, and suddenly you were responsible for finding replacement parts. You borrowed some war machines and headed for the Tower of to see if Morden Kanan had any, but were waylaid by Raggadragga and the Gorguts gang, debt collectors in the employ of Arkan the Cruel, who sported a crossed-out symbol of Zariel on their vehicle. They rode off your tormentor, but you got over that quickly by massacring them and claiming their demon grinder instead. Then, at the Lake of Boiling Blood, you discovered the Tower of was missing, and Morden Kanan's Yugoloths had no idea when he'd return. In fact, they only decided against killing you because you said you were there to see their master, and they wanted to make sure he was okay with you dying first. After that, you met Smilo the Defiler, who offered to pay for the heads of the other warlords, and suggested you ask at the Demon Zapper for a reference to see Bell. He also came on to Ethel, but she wouldn't have a bar of it, risky acronyms aside. And then at the Demon Zapper, you spoke with Ralzala the Dow, who promised to get you in with Belle if you'll break her ethereal chain with Arkan's weapon, forged from one of Tiamat's teeth. But you felt you needed directions, so you left for the Hobgoblin Docks, where a Morenoloth ferries passengers across the River Styx. Red Ruth lives in the Bone Bramble Forest on the other side, and can pinpoint locations with magic. You just hope she enjoys her boar meat rotten. And that about brings us to now. In the story so far, you went to Bargriviek's wharf, looking to cross the River Styx in search of a guide, to find replacement parts for Mad Maggie's psychic distillerator, a machine that might extract Lulu's memories and locate Zariel's sword. At the Bloodied Axe Tavern, Kenzay Kenway was reunited with First Mate Bugsy, now captain of his old ship, the Bobbing Imp, which survived the fall from Elturel due to the ruins of ancient Astoria, subsequently forfeited by Kenway in return for Torm's own power and guidance. The warlord Feanor was also at the Hobgoblin establishment, so Kenway enlisted Bugsy to help assassinate her, although Alina and Jean Lemore were hesitant to get involved. Then you went outside and eliminated the rest of Feanor's handsy minions and absconded with her gilded war machine. You also acquired her barge, which was cloaked in an inlet upriver, and took it across the Styx before heading to the Bone Bramble Forest. After a brief waltz with dryad spirits among the osseous trees and pulsating bloody vines, you were praised for your naughtiness by Red Ruth, and then purchased from her the directions to several Avernian hotspots, paying with some uncomfortable fey delights that included Jean Lemore's embarrassing fantasies about Tabaxi and Ethel's growing quandaries about right and wrong. Sufficiently orientated, you returned to catch an escort from the Bobbing Imp down past the Stygian dock to the Wandering Emporium, where you acquired some magic items from a mutated wizard with a tentacle for an arm, but rejected the overpriced food at the restaurant. Then Lulu was kidnapped by Hellwasps, and Marka and Kenway were too busy staring into each other's eyes to help. So the dream team proceeded alone to climb up through some sticky orifices in a huge floating nest, poke at corpses full of grubs, fight some giant worker wasps, kill a hell wasp queen, and pull Lulu out of a digestive sac in the wall, making Alina extremely buff in the process. Soon after fleeing the nesting grounds, you learned at a tiefling settlement that Tiamat was imprisoned by Zariel and plots to escape. Then Jean Lemore urged you into the magical darkness of the Storm Shroud in search of Mary Bell. In the gloom, Alina was unable to let go of Marker's giant snake, and so went with him into a vortex of electrified wind. Thunder deafened you, pebbles flew at you, and the ground itself was shocking, but at least no one was struck by lightning. You ascended the crown of the Tempest, and soon found yourselves before Ascentus itself, at the top of the mountain. An ancient Cibriax lord, Ascentus had absorbed scores of musicians, and Mary Bell was among them. While the demon slumbered, she and the other souls of the Incorporated begged you telepathically to set them free. And to the great sorrow of Jean Lemore, the only way to do that was to kill the whole monster, and Mary Bell along with it. Empowered by Jean Lemore's love, Mary Bell held the dissenters at bay by hijacking their hive mind. And so you fought a rather frustrating battle full of control spells, Marker sending in waves of summons, Ethel counterspelling like crazy, until finally Kenway jumped inside the demon's maw and smashed it open from within. As it melted into Ica, Mary Bell appeared to Jean Lemore one last time and wished him farewell before dispersing, leaving him to cry on his knees in the goop. At least the Sardioran transducer was among the loot, and you were able to grab a bunch of valuables before hightailing it from the mountain and back into the wastelands. And that about brings us to now. In the story so far, you left the Storm Shroud with an emotionally unstable Jean Lemore in tow, but had little time to reflect, since the opportunity soon arose for Alina to add some sandworm skulls to her collection. After fixing them to your war machines, you took a detour from the road trip to free an imprisoned Ultraloth and take its class on molding slime homunculi from the pit of Shumrath. You kicked back while your new green friends drove you to Worm's Wharf so you could secure passage on a Moreneloth barge on the other side, where you met Krull, the death priest Tortle, who said he required tribute before he'd take you to see Archon. Kenway was happy to give away the shield of the Hidden Lord, since he decided that Gargorth wasn't his friend anymore. And thus Krull led you to Tiamat's monument, where Archon and his pouty Minotaur bodyguard demanded you pay them back for what was stolen by the Van Thampers, even though you were really only secondary thieves in that matter. Alternatively, he said that he'd accept an orb of dragonkind. But you also wanted help freeing Ralzala the Dow, and he'd only do that if you gave Krull Lulu to experiment on, which you refused, realizing there were other Celestials around who might do in her stead. There was also a wizard said to know where to find the orb, but when you arrived at his obelisk, you discovered he was really a demon. The demon said it had been summoned to guard the life force of Uldrak the Empyrean, and after Uldrak was killed by Tiamat, she imprisoned the demon as well, preventing it from reaching Uldrak to resurrect him. And it should be noted that Uldrak's magic, of course, precluded it from suiciding or playing along with its death in any way. Irregardless, when you tried to free the bastard, it rather rudely attempted to eat you. And so, that was of course the end of it. You took a magic dagger from its melting corpse, which Ethel identified as containing Uldrak's life force. Then Kenway realized there was a bloody great sword on the map, which you figured might be Uldrak's, because of the fact that Empyreans are of course Biggins. So you headed that way, now with a random monodrone enlisted in Ethel's entourage of misfits. You were only waylaid briefly by an imp at Lucille's Moor, but Jael convinced that he had a wart problem and was seeking an arcane healer in the south, so you were at Uldrak's grave in no time. Only it wasn't a grave at all, because as Marker detected with his wand, Tiamat had transformed Uldrak into a spined devil as punishment, and he'd been living all this time rather quaintly inside his old helm, unable to find the demon he'd summoned. You restored his Empyrean form by stabbing him with a magic knife, and he gladly gave you his orb of dragonkind. Then Alina asked him to free Ralzala and Mooncolor from the demon zapper, and sure enough he did. So, Ralzala kept her promise and wrote you a letter of introduction to Bell, before the three of them plane shifted the fuck out of Avernus, leaving you to head for Bell's Forge in search of the psychomorphic core. Along the way you were approached by an Erinye bounty hunter, seeking Smiler the Defiler, but you said you didn't know where he was, or in Ethel's case, evaded the question. Marker making things more suspicious with guidance. So, she threw her life away as well, shortly thereafter being crushed by Kenway between the Golden Doom's wrecking ball and the palm of Ethel's big blue hand. Now you seek to reclaim your cloaked barge and traverse the river Styx to enter Bell's volcano and speak with the pit fiend himself. Some of you thinking perhaps that you might have a bone to pick with him or two. And that about brings us to now. In the story so far, you ventured into Bell's forge with Ralzala's letter of introduction, and he agreed to give you a psychomorphic core in exchange for 9 adamantine rods, confiscated from him by Zariel's agents. According to his spies, they were hidden in a wrecked flying fortress to keep them safe for her return. You also learned the crew of the Bobbing Imp were involved in the production of the Sunshine drug, made by mixing Tortle yolk with the Malkazidian crystals they were shipping from the Dispatrian mountains. While you processed that information, you went to find Mordenkainen, who said he'd swap your Zemnidian imager for a pint of blood from the demon Kostichi. Ethel was so starstruck, she considered ditching the whole campaign to become the wizard's intern. But luckily, he wasn't impressed, really, by anything. So you dragged her away, and soon you were all using a clever strategy involving Bigby's hand, slime homunculi, a dagger, an empty vial, and a giant eagle to cheese the Kostichi encounter entirely, leaving the afternoon free for a little bounty hunting at the Sea of Victory. There, Jean Lemore told a gang of warlords to go home, while Kenway unbiked their leader Bitterbreath. Marker thorn-whipped a bearded devil off another bike, and Ethel finished the job by running the boss over with the Golden Doom, so Alina was free to add his head to her collection. Mordenkainen accepted the Costa-cheesed blood, and was also able to link Lulu's amnesia to the effects of the river Styx. Despite having his #1 fan in the house though, he still wasn't inspired enough to come up with a cure, but he did give Marker some fire immunity potions, which you subsequently forgot to use in the Plains of Fire, opting instead for wet Hessian sacks around the heads. Still, you made it to the wreckage, Kenway quite relaxed in the warmth and not quite sure what all the fuss was about. You opted for an old-fashioned Avernian drive-by, running down the Meragon guards and entering at the ground floor. You scaled the fortress, nearly losing Alina and Kenway down the elevator shaft, but for Marker's quick thinking, turning Kenway into a gorilla so he could drop a rope down, only to discover that no one even needed one and everyone was apparently just watching the whole show for a laugh. In the command deck, you found the Arcanoloth Zakundi, who was chained up beside the 9 rods. Turned traitor to Bell, he'd learned that the rods actually unlock the companion, suggesting there might be something inside. Then, after JL nearly blew the whole place up by putting a soul coin in the broken generator, you took that knowledge back to Bell and convinced him to let you keep the psychomorphic core as well as the 9 rods. He even freed Kenway's crew so they could help put Zariel out of business. But Marker bit his tongue, choosing the people of Elturel in the party over his own, who remain enslaved. Hopefully, if Bell regains power, he won't need to continue his relationship with Levistus, who corrupted Kenway's brother. But whether he might have been willing to cease Sunshine production is a question left unanswered. Bell now accompanies his armies to Elturel, where Yeenagu is said to have joined Baphomet in the assault, and Zariel's return from Mechanus is imminent. At last, Kenway was able to use his water vehicle proficiency to guide the Bobbing Imp back to Bargriviak's Wharf, where he could fulfill his dream of buying full-plate armor. Now it seems you're finally ready to have Mad Maggie unlock Lulu's memories, and hopefully discover the location of the Sword of Zariel. And that about brings us to now. And with that, it is Chapter 4. Your search for the replacement parts at an end, and Kensei Kenway's crew liberated from servitude. You headed to Fort Knucklebone, where Mad Maggie displayed Lulu's memories on a holographic projector, restoring her magic in the process. In a desperate attempt to protect Zariel's sword from Yeenagu's pet demon Krokiktoik, Lulu had channeled the energy of Yael's soul to form an impenetrable crystalline formation around it, trapping Yael and the demon with the sword for more than 100 Tyrillian years. The Crystal Hall, as Lulu called it, was hidden beneath the crypt of the Hellriders. One of Zariel's commanders, Zelanthius, had conspired to hide it there to prevent Zariel from destroying it before he could find leverage, or even allies who would challenge her. When you arrived, you discovered gnolls had broken into the crypt in search of Krokiktoik, so you hunted them down and killed the evil Flind at their command. Then Elanthius arrived, his magic having alerted him to the breach. He saw and knew the allies he'd been waiting for, and gave you access to the Hellrider Gold, hoping it might help you survive the trials to come. Then Lulu breached the crystal hall, and you descended to fight the demon. After a frantic battle in which Jean Lemore was briefly swallowed only to be spewed back out again in a steaming mess of acid vomit, Marka in elemental form pounded Krokik head into the ground, and Alina got away without so much as a scratch. You retrieved the sword of Zariel while Yale and Elanthius had a private moment behind some crystals. Yale warned you that although you might seek to use the sword, attuning to it would change you forever. Then the crystal hall collapsed as you escaped, and Elanthius swore he'd never stop until Yale was free. But as you emerged from the crypt, you were ambushed by Maud Hatt and her minions. She'd been tracking you via her bracelet, which Ethel still had in her haversack. And she was accompanied by Volus Foot, who you slew long ago and have now slain once again. You managed to convince Maud throughout the battle that she should switch sides and cease to align herself with Zariel and the evil of the devils. And so she has become your ally. And now, your final challenge is nearly at hand. But first you need to prepare. Will you attempt to bargain with Zariel, risking her wrath? Or try to challenge her head-on in battle? Or will you attempt to free Naskios and break the chains that bind the city of Elturel? Now that Primus has ruled against the legitimacy of Fabius Krieg's contract, the souls of the city's survivors are free to leave Avernus, at least in theory. Though not if they're consumed by demons or submerged in the river Styx first. Will one of you attune to the sword of Zariel to strengthen your position? Cannot be Elanthius, nor can it be Maud Hatt. Will you seek out an ally among the many beings you've encountered along your journey? One thing is for certain, the Wandering Emporium awaits, and you're flushed with cash.